Alright, so there's a lot of music critics on the internet nowadays. Some of them loved, some of them hated, and then there's just some that's missing a few brain cells. But even with all of these characters giving their god-awful music takes, I think we can wholeheartedly agree that Pitchfork's ability to rank music is about as good as my ability to run a mile in less than 30 minutes. And just last week, the music blog put out their annual 50 best albums of the year, this time for 2022, which just ended up giving me another excuse to put this side of my block list. So now let's take a look at some of the albums they ranked way too low and way too high, and see what these would actually hold up for the best albums of this year. Alright, so for the first entry coming straight out of the music media sweatshop is Earl Sweatshirt Sick, being ranked number 17 this year by my guy Matthew. Now while Matt here gave a pretty nice little description, I do feel like putting it in the top 20 this year is something that can be debated by most, although for me personally I feel like this is the only one they might have gotten right. I mean, in comparison to most other hip hop projects that came out this year, I feel like this can confidently sit in the top 20, although I feel like the biggest issue was the fact that it didn't really have much replay value. Like, it kind of came and went like your average Little Baby or Youngboy album, except I could actually bear listening to it. But still, at the same time, this project definitely made for a good start towards a pretty bleak 2022, utilizing trap sounds and sample beats to make some of these more grittier and hard-hitting tracks such as 2010, Tabula Rasa, and Titanic. And let's not forget the nice serving of Earl's monotone and relaxed verses, this time going on about his time spent during the peak of the pandemic, but instead of him going in on the usual offbeat, muddy as hell vocals, this time he actually decides, hey, I want to make an album not sound like I threw it together in 5 minutes off of a gallon of NyQuil. And I think that shows such a bigger representation of his musical growth, whether or not this sits high on his discography. And I feel like it's because instead of Earl trying to push outside the boundary so much to the point where we get songs like East, instead he learns to adapt and improve under the current meta of hip hop, which includes trap inspired sounds and sample loops, and in turn it makes this more cohesive and grounded album that just about any new age hip hop nerd can get into. So in conclusion, good job Pitchfork, you actually did something right. Now up at number 6 is Rosalia's latest and third studio album Motomami, alongside a nice write-up from Pitchfork Robot number 2569, aka Madison Bloom, if that is your name. Now while I understand everyone has their own taste and whatnot, and music is subjective and all that, I also feel like putting this album this high on the list is like the equivalent of taking a shit ton of drugs and confidently thinking that LaMelo Ball is a good basketball player. And I mean, don't get me wrong, she did her little thing, there were some fun tracks on here of course, but at the same time, I feel like on the list of top 50 albums this year, I feel like this isn't really screaming that loudly in comparison to what it's going up against, especially what it ranks over. But hey, as stated before, this album still has some high notes, utilizing that traditional Latin pop sound, a little bit of flamenco, some bachata, and tons of distortion to make this more adventurous and wild take on the mainstream Spanish and Latin pop scene. And when going through the lyrics, it's a bit more racy and all over the place, kind of feeling like she's just going with the rhythm instead of actually writing anything more substantial. But still, when you have tracks like Candy and Diablo, are you really going to complain? I don't know, but at the end of the day, I do feel like putting it at number 6, especially over albums like Mr. Morale and Dawn FM, is a wild thing to do, even for Pitchfork's taste. Alright, now for this next one, it's a little bit low-key, especially since the artist only has less than 50,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, but still I gotta show it props because I feel like this album really did shine a lot in comparison to most electronic albums I've heard this year. And alongside a nice little write-up from fellow sweatshop worker Simon, the album Plonk from electronic artist Huerco S is an amazing example of how to properly work one's energy into their music. Each track feels so relaxed and takes little elements from strings and synths, trying to grab onto anything to try and make these more melodic and wavy tracks such as Plonk 10 and Plonk 7. And then with the former, you get little hints of a gradual rise thanks to the subtle high-pitched synths tossed in between these more somber and monotone sounds that all come together to make me think about being on the ocean or some shit. I mean, overall, this album really does elevate me whenever I listen to it, serving as a good background noise for a setting or something to help me write this godforsaken script. And coming off an old banger of the same flair, you'd be questioning if the upcoming artist would be able to hold his weight after 6 years, but lo and behold, he's just been spending his time perfecting his craft. So while Pitchfork can throw Buddy under the bus and put him in the top 40, I would gladly place him in the top 20 if I had to curate a list. Now this is where it gets really spicy, because I never thought I'd see the day where Kendrick would be placed lower than Dawn FM and fucking Bjork, dog. Although I do love Bjork and that album was good. But once again, we got another Matthew with another write-up, but unfortunately it wasn't enough if it's still getting put within the same range as Earl Sweatshirt Sick. But still, to keep things on a positive note, at least it was still given its flowers. Although it wasn't the best album in Kendrick's discography, it was still able to hold its weight far above about 99% of the hip-hop albums that dropped this year. I mean, I think what made this album really stand out was the fact that, well, for starters, starters, it's been 5 years since Kendrick's last project and niggas was desperate, which is me, I'm niggas. But still, the other fact is that the new message that Kendrick was dishing out in this album was something much more in your face in comparison to his previous album, Damn. This time talking about relationship issues, black mental health, our desire to put him on a pedestal, and even a negative perception of the LGBTQ+ community. And although this album doesn't hit as hard as his arguably best, To Pimp a Butterfly, does, it still holds its weight as another damn good album from Kendrick Lamar, and another reason why he's one of the best rappers of today's generation. So once again, Pitchfork, you disappoint me and rank Kung Fu Kenny way too low on this list. Now, before the Beehive pisses themselves in frustration in my comments, I do want y'all to know that I do still consider this album good, but to be the best out of the top 50 this year, yeah, that's fucking absurd. I mean, when I first heard that Beyonce was coming through with the dance album, I wouldn't say I was very skeptical, because at least with Beyonce, you know she's capable of making that kind of music, unlike some other artists. But at the same time, Isabella, you can't be going around spreading your propaganda for niggas like me to laugh at. Now, I stated before, this album was pretty darn good. It has some house elements, funk elements, and an overall great execution that far exceeded most other pop dance projects that came out this year. Tracks like Break My Soul and Energy utilize that chic and sexy vibe that Beyonce always liked to portray, alongside the strong hits of bass and a catchy chorus on the latter, to make for some of my favorite songs from the album. I guess the only reason why I wouldn't place it at number 1 is because I feel like there simply was just better stuff out there. Or to put it in simpler terms, it's not that it was bad, it just wasn't the best, if that makes sense. I don't know. I mean, I just feel like putting it over artists like Lucretia Dalt and Kendrick Lamar once again is a wild thing to do, but hey, at the end of the day, I guess everyone has their own taste, even Pitchfork. But even still, you guys ranked this album way too high, and I stand by that. But at the end of the day, there are different music critics for every angle of the music niche. It all just comes down to who you feel should be the best anyways. And for me, when looking at this Pitchfork list, I feel like I was once again proving why having your own opinion on music is always important. But hey, it's not like you guys have any opinions anyways. Could you rather spend your time hearing my beautiful voice give god-awful music takes? But on that note, if you liked the video, feel free to subscribe as well, follow my IG and Twitter, and follow Chocolate on Instagram for more illustrations. And on that note, I'll see you guys on Friday when I try to dodge a lawsuit from Pitchfork themselves. Peace.
Boom.